As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion. Everybody just started running for the door. Everybody was trapped.
Doctors treating the injured here say most of the 100 patients treated so far are suffering not just smoke inhalation and eye damage, but fractures. Many of them have told the doctors that they were responding to the attack on the South Tower when they were suddenly trapped by the second explosion, and many of the fractures they're suffering come not from fallen debris, but from the concussive force of the explosion, which slammed them against walls, knocked them to the ground, or slammed them up against their own ambulances.
He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. He says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions, and he said that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of people in those two towers when the explosions took place. He said
there was a lot of talk there in New York of another explosion prior to the collapse of the first building.
The design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives have been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. He gave us information that helped uncover Al-Qaeda cells' efforts to obtain biological weapons.
What a prat. We may not know all there is to know about 9/11, but we know enough. We don't need any more evidence. What's of paramount importance is convincing people 9/11 was an inside job, planned and executed by the Bush administration. Hopefully this video will act as a guide as to how best to do this. What I find astonishing, nearly all those who vehemently believe the official account invariably do not possess even a fundamental understanding of the most serious aspects of 9/11. Are they aware, for instance, of the warnings Britain, Russia and many other countries gave to the US of impending attacks with aircraft being used as missiles? Are they aware of US civil air defence procedure?
The most significant evidence, the first plane hit at 8:46 a.m, the southern tower at about 9:05 a.m, the third plane hit the Pentagon at 9:38 a.m. They knew there was a hijack between 8:10 and 8:20 in the morning, let's say 8:15, so they knew half an hour before the first plane, 3/4 of an hour before the second plane, and an hour and a half before the third plane hit their targets. And not once in that time did they scramble a warplane to intercept. Now that is just staggering.
Is the revelation that Cheney lied when he testified alongside President Bush for the 9/11 Commission? So, why can't Cheney seem to keep his story straight? And what implications does this have for the larger narrative pushed forward by the 9/11 Commission? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Robbie Martin, independent journalist and co-host of Media Roots Radio. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
So, Robbie, Cheney changes his story. Let me just briefly explain why. In this documentary on Showtime, he says that there was a shoot-down order, that he actually said he was going to shoot down the plane to save lives, which actually contradicts the 9/11 Commission report that says that there was no order made. Why do you think he changed his story here?
Well, because I think that he probably thought that people didn't remember that he had presidential emergency powers on that day. And I mean, the testimony shows that Cheney, was at least criminally culpable for not issuing an evacuation order from the Pentagon. And on top of that, he was acting as emergency president at the time because Bush was in the air the whole day.
Yeah, and you know what? This is actually a really important aspect of this because Norman Mineta, there's a really important testimony from the Transportation Secretary who actually testified for the 9/11 Commission. It was omitted from the official report, but he says that there was some sort of order made, and let's hear this testimony.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, The young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
Okay, so here he is saying the order still stands. Cheney's directing him to do this. Obviously there was an order for something. If it wasn't for a shoot-down order, what was it for?
Well, that's a great question, and that's something that the American public would probably love to have answered, but the problem is that testimony never actually made it inside the commission report. So, and Norma Mineta was actually asked about that later on. I think some activist independent journalists asked him about it, and he said that he wouldn't change anything he said in that testimony.
So Cheney, during the testimony, said the plane's 10 miles out, 20 miles out, 30 miles out. Does the order still stand? Cheney's saying, of course they still stand. Obviously, he's talking about a plane coming close. Why do you think there wasn't an evacuation order issued from the Pentagon?
Well, that's also a great question. 125 people died in the Pentagon attack alone.
Are they aware of what happened to WTC-7 on the day of 9/11? Do they know kerosene plane fuel's maximum temperature is 900 degrees? Do they know grade A steel can only be compromised if temperatures reach 1500 degrees?
The steel-supported twin towers were built to withstand the impact of a passenger jetliner, yet the official explanation for their collapse is that the burning jet fuel heated the steel support beams and caused them to buckle. Expert independent investigators insist that it's impossible for jet fuel burning in oxygen to melt steel, and that most of the jet fuel burned up outside the buildings in clearly visible fireballs. After the crashes, the white smoke turned black, indicating cooling temperatures, not rising temperatures as reported.
Do they know owner of the Twin Towers, Larry Silverstein, was paid $7.1 billion due to 35 separate insurance policies taken out soon after he bought them for a paltry $15 million that very same year? Do they know the president's brother, Marvin, was in charge of security at the towers?
Who was a director in the company that provided electronic security for the World Trade Center and Washington's Dulles Airport, both involved in September 11th? None other than the president's younger brother. From 1996 to 2000, Securicom installed what was referred to as a new security system at the World Trade Center. Wirt D. Walker III, a cousin of the Bush brothers, was CEO of Securicom from 1999 until 2002. Interestingly, these facts have not been made public. Was it only a security system that was added during those years, or was it also the wiring for a long-awaited plan?
No, they most certainly do not know, because if they did, they couldn't possibly believe the official account. Yet these very same people have the gall to label 9/11 truthers conspiracy theorists. What irony. I mean, isn't it bad enough listening to people have the brains of a rocking horse, but then they look down on you with disdain because you bother to ask patently obvious questions? Sometimes it's really too much to take. No one has the right to open their mouth if they cannot answer every last one of the questions I just raised. To think Silverstein has never been investigated is beyond the boundaries of sanity.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
This little vermin, which incidentally is best buddies with that Netanyahu, I mean, it takes one to know one here, buys two buildings which originally cost around $1 billion for a soppy $15 million. He then quickly insures them for around 500 times that amount and gets paid $7 billion? No questions asked. I mean, how can this be? Believing the mainstream media is to some extent excusable, but to literally stop thinking is not. Of course, unbeknown to these idiotic sheep, without a fully compliant media, 9/11 could never have taken place. So how should one go about trying to convince others? Well, I believe the best one should hope for is to simply plant the seed, no more. Hopefully that person will then be encouraged to look on the internet where, let's face it, all the information one ever needs on any subject matter exists. Small wonder they're so desperate to control the internet. The trick is getting people to browse the net. Once this happens, the chances are they'll start to see gaping holes in the official account. I've come to the conclusion it helps not to be the one to initially bring up 9/11. If it becomes a talking point, one needs to adopt the middle ground, for it's a shoo-in you'll be labelled a conspiracy theorist. This way you can kill this derogatory term by saying, conspiracy? Look, I don't know about all this conspiracy stuff, but I do know what a controlled demolition looks like. Don't you? Always great ending off with a question. Let them make the next move. If they don't, then they're not worth talking to. If the conversation continues, stick to this one point. It is imperative not to elaborate, and most certainly do not show you're a smart-ass, for jealousy is a human trait. Also, if one bombards a non-truther with fact after fact, the listener will rapidly lose attention. This is because nobody enjoys feeling so brainless as to be unaware of so much information. You never want to make out you're way smarter than the person you're trying to convince. This is why I say, stick to the point. I saw controlled demolitions. What did you see? Even if someone says something like, yeah, and that little rat Silverstein made $7 billion profit because his buildings were attacked, you merely say, well, like I said, I don't know about all that, but I do know what my eyes saw.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Then mention how we've all seen Las Vegas hotels brought down through controlled demolitions. Explain the obvious. The only way is by planting explosives throughout the building, most especially at the very foundations, in order to conduct an implosion. We don't see these buildings exploding, we see them collapse from within. Then suggest on 9/11 what your eyes saw was very much the same thing. And kerosene plane fuel just cannot do this. If they happen to ask how you know so much about controlled demolition, just say you've read what independent demolition experts said on the internet. Even if you haven't, it's time we started playing a little dirty too. No use sitting there like an academic plum. We've got to use our brains without letting people know we're using our brains. Continue to make out you don't know anything about conspiracies. But please, if they give you bullshit, do go as far as say, don't insult me calling me a conspiracy theorist. It's not my fault you don't know what a controlled demolition looks like, you silly egg. So, number 1, plant a seed. Number 2, don't initially bring up 9/11. 3, adopt the middle ground. Make out you're a bit dense. 4, tell them what your eyes saw. Controlled demolitions. 5, show them the sequence of buildings being demolished at the beginning of this video. Now you can ask, what's the difference in these examples? From here it really should be plain sailing. All the ammo is there. That is, so long as you don't get involved in protracted arguments. Do that and all is lost. Always keep your cool. See what they say. Let them dig a hole for themselves. Say this, even though we were told the Twin Towers collapsed because planes hit the buildings, it's a cast iron certainty they would never use old planes to do the job of demolition experts. Then show the inexplicable collapse of WTC-7 and ask them if they felt this was a controlled demolition. Watch them go. Oh yeah, that is. Game, set and match.
This is Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper that fell on the afternoon of September 11th.
The government says that fire brought it down. However, 1,500 architects and engineers concluded it was a controlled demolition.
Over 6,000 of my fellow service members have given their lives.
Thousands of my fellow first responders are dying.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
I'm a structural engineer.
I'm a New York City correction officer.
I'm an Air Force pilot.
I'm a father who lost his son.
We're Americans, and we deserve...
I lost my husband.
My son.
My uncle.
My nephew. September 11th, 2001.
Most people don't know a third tower fell that day.
The government says fire brought it down.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
I, along with 1,400 other architects and engineers,
have found the government's conclusion to be physically impossible.
Impossible.
We need the truth about what happened that day.
Go to rememberbuilding7.org.
When you feel you've made a little progress, a good way to finish off is by saying, look, I can fully understand why you don't want to believe certain people could do such a terrible act. However, one must never turn their back on the truth simply because it's too horrifying. Surely what matters most is punishing those responsible. Finally, I've always wanted to update my earlier videos, 9/11 by GMM on YouTube. So I'm just going to quickly mention the most significant details I originally admitted. Firstly, isn't it incredible how 7 of the 19 alleged hijackers are still alive today? I mean, what more evidence does one need? To make such a monumental gaffe is incredible. The plain simple truth is 7 of the 19 hijackers are alive and kicking.
But of course we heard within days of the events that something like 5 or 6 of these people were still alive and well and living in the Middle East. Why wasn't this addressed in the 9/11 Commission report? Why wasn't there some inquiry as to who were the real hijackers if in fact the people who had been identified were clearly not the right people?
One of them was said to have been pretty damn useless, flying a 2-seater Cessna. However, Hani Hanjour apparently effected a 540-degree corkscrew manoeuvre at full throttle to end up ramming his plane straight into the budget analyst office, where Pentagon officials were trying to discover how the small matter of 2.3 trillion went walkies. I mean, how the hell could 2.3 trill go on the missing list, and then the geezer who can barely fly a kite managed to evade all of America's most sophisticated civil air defense, fly around for an hour or so, and end up smashing to the one place where they're trying to locate all the missing wonga? I mean, give me a break. Incidentally, experienced pilots tried to emulate this very manoeuvre in simulations with little or no success. It's almost an impossible feat. Yet this is what we were told. Initial eyewitness reports stated they were grey military planes with no windows.
No, it wasn't in the commercial airline. No, that second one wasn't no commercial. No, the second one definitely. The first one I never saw. The second one I saw was big though. Yeah, big enough. It was no Cessna. No, no. It was no Cessna. But it didn't have any markings on it that I saw. No, I didn't see any. The second one, it didn't have, like no camouflage or anything. No emblems, no logos.
The plane circle around and actually come on to the opposite side of the building and smash into the Trade Center. It was great, to be honest with you.
And the plane wasn't no airline or anything. It was a twin-engine, big gray plane.
Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the side.
No, it was a black plane. It looked like a fighter jet.
It looked like a fighter jet.
And it didn't look like a commercial jet.
It was like a military plane. It was a military plane.
Could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot.
For me, the very fact these reports were never once repeated indicates there was a massive media cover-up. Significantly, footage of Flight 175 just before it hit the South Tower revealed something astonishing. The undercarriage had a large object attached to it. It's there for all to see. There's no denying it. Aviation experts, most especially those in Pilots for 9/11 Truth, confirm no passenger airliner should have such an object attached to it. This was in all likelihood Raytheon's unmanned aerial vehicle Global Hawk system, which allowed planes to be flown by remote control, just like those drone thingamajigs. This had to be the case because both military and airline pilots are unanimous. No way could novice pilots have flown those jets into the towers. No possible chance. Finally, we must not forget Philip Marshall. He was one of the founders of Pilots for 9/11 Truth, a veteran pilot and chief aviation expert who wrote a book, The Big Bamboozle, about the blatant lies of 9/11. Earlier this year it was claimed he shot his 2 children, Alex and Michaela, and then turned the gun on himself. Of course, the mainstream media had all the details of how and why this happened, well before the police even thought about conducting an investigation. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? How is it all these incredibly brave people who are prepared to stand up against a tyrannous government end up committing suicide? By the way, there's one cast iron certainty in the universe. There's no possible chance I'll ever commit suicide. Just thought I'd let you know that.